And so the first Dragonborn meets the last Dragonborn at the summit of Apocrypha.
Miraak is supposedly the first Dragonborn, but what exactly does that mean? For older subscribers to the channel, you may be familiar with the Mannimarco lore video that I did back in Halloween of 2023. In that video, we discussed how Mannimarco is referred to as the first of the Liches, but the moniker of first is not meant to imply chronology in that instance. Dragon priests, for example, are liches, but they predate Mannimarco's ascension into one himself. Rather, when we call the Worm King the first of the liches, it's to grant him an air of significance. It's an honorary title meant to imply importance. My position here with Miraak is that while it's possible that he was referring to himself as the first Dragonborn in a chronological sense, it's just as likely, if not more likely, that he was using it in an honorary sense, much like Mannimarco, and perhaps he was even using it in a secret third way. I understand, however, that this is perhaps a fringe theory, but I would like to present you with my reasons for believing it if you would be kind enough to follow through with me. If you enjoy content like this, please consider leaving a like, comment, or even subscribing so you don't miss out on further videos such as this in the future. I generally don't ask for stuff like this, but these lore videos take a lot of time and research, and I genuinely like feedback to know if I should do more of them or less. So, with that preface out of the way, please allow me to show you how I reached my conclusion.
Then you have to develop criteria for how you decide what actually did happen and what didn't happen. It's true of every figure from the past. How do you go about establishing that somebody actually said and did what they're recorded saying and doing if you have sources? With that in mind, what you look for are materials that are found in multiple sources that are independent of each other.
That was a clip of Dr. Bart Ehrman on Alex O'Connor's podcast, Within Reason. Dr. Ehrman is a scholar and analyst of the Biblical New Testament and is a very well-respected member of his field. The clip is from a very interesting discussion the two had, and I thought it would fit very nicely here in framing the main historical issue with Miraak's claim. I'll post the full discussion in the description if any of you would like to check that video out, hopefully after you watch this. The first and most apparent problem with Miraak as the first Dragonborn in a chronological sense is that there is nothing backing this claim up in-game. Miraak states that he is the first Dragonborn, yes, but there is not a single other source that corroborates this claim in the timeline outside of that one quote. You see, historically speaking, it's improper to just take a claim at face value like that. Otherwise, we would have to believe everything that historical documents state, and if we did that, we would have no actual basis for the factual reality of the past. Take Herodotus, for example. Herodotus is widely acclaimed to be the world's first Western historian. His work known as the Histories is a compilation of stories that Herodotus collected during his lifetime from throughout the Greek world. His work is insurmountably important, but that's not to say that it's entirely correct. Herodotus frequently gets numbers wrong in his work, overestimates army sizes, and at certain points seems to heavily imply the existence of mythological creatures. This is where archaeology and science can enter the equation and verify the truth of the matter asserted, so we can figure out what Herodotus was correct and incorrect about. And this is basically the process of history. When I was in college, for example, I frequently had to find multiple sources backing up the same conclusion when writing historical papers, otherwise the professor would simply not accept my work, and I think the same process of verification needs to be applied here. But wait a minute, you may say. This is not a historical document we're talking about. This is a direct quote from Miraak himself. I would be happy to grant you this. Yes, we are receiving a direct assertion from Miraak that he is the first. But I would again remind you all, this is nothing more than a bold assertion, and the same criteria for analyzing the histories must be used in analyzing Miraak. We have no confirmation on his direct usage of the word either, nor evidence to corroborate him in a chronological sense. So what this all boils down to is that we cannot trust that Miraak is the first chronological Dragonborn just because he says so. To further complicate things, let's look at the era Miraak was from. Miraak lived during the Merethic era and worked as a dragon priest. We know it had to be the Merethic era because it is the agreed-upon timeline wherein the dragon cult presided over Skyrim. Miraak was specifically around, in fact, during what would appear to be the late Merethic era, making him a contemporary with other Nordic figures such as Hakon One-Eye, Azidal, and Valak the Jailer.
They wanted to use me to deal with Alduin, Hakon and the rest. I chose otherwise.
And we know that it was during the late Merethic era because Hakon was one of the Nord heroes who banished Alduin, which ushered in the end of the Dragon War. And because Miraak and Hakon are men whose lifespans are slim, this would place Miraak around this time. However, the Merethic era is a complicated time. History is somewhat muddled during this period. The Dragon War, for example, has no start nor end date that we are precisely aware of. So it makes things confusing when Miraak states he is the first Dragonborn because there's not much recorded properly during this time. I will point out that there are no other examples of Dragonborns predating Miraak, but this is not sufficient evidence, or evidence at all actually, that proves his claim. An absence of evidence is not evidence of an absence, is an adage I'm sure we're all aware of, and it applies here perfectly. It's very important to note here that dragons are known to have hailed from two places outside of Tamriel, Atmora and Akavir. Akavir has been referred to as Dragonland in many sources, and Atmora is known to have had dragon priests who established a certain order between dragons and the Atmoran Proto-Nords. The Akaviri Dragon Guard of the First Era are said to have come to Tamriel in search of a Dragonborn. When greeted with the voice of Riemann Cyrodiil during the events of Pale Pass, they surrendered on the spot, and it's the reason behind their surrender that we're interested in here. They surrendered because they, apparently, had been searching for Riemann. The exact quote that the Akaviri say to Riemann in the book The Rise and Fall of the Blades is, "We have been searching for you." This is widely considered to mean that the Dragon Guard were searching not for Riemann specifically, but for a Dragonborn. The Book of the Dragonborn adds to this, stating that the Akaviri soldiers were the first people to even proclaim Riemann to be a Dragonborn. And because of this, what I really want to touch on here is the possibility of Dragonborns from Akavir. Unfortunately, not much is known of Akavir's history, as the central location for the Elder Scrolls series has always been on the continent of Tamriel. Because of this, I don't think we can wholesale throw out the idea of there being Dragonborns from Akavir. However, we also are not allowed to assume Akaviri Dragonborns on this principle alone. All we can do is infer that the Dragon Guard, in some sense, knew what a Dovahkiin was. Now, whether this was from a first-hand experience, divine revelation, or some secret third thing, we may never know, but it's an interesting topic to bring up. And of course, then there's Atmora. Now, Atmora does not boast any knowledge about Dragonborns before Miraak, but it does have information about a dragon cult, which I think is important because Miraak was, of course, a dragon priest in his life before his service to Hermaeus Mora. So it leads to a natural question. Is there a connection between being a Dovahkiin and being a dragon priest? Not really, but perhaps, due to one small sentence in a lore book from the Dragonborn DLC. In The Guardian and the Traitor, the story of Miraak's banishment from Solstheim is told. The Guardian, identified as Valak the Jailer, and the Traitor, Miraak, are both dragon priests. When Valak discovers Miraak's allegiance to Hermaeus Mora, the two face off in a battle, and this is the interesting part. The exact passage describing the fight goes as follows. The two fought a mighty battle that lasted for days, each hurling terrible arcane energies and Thu'um shouts at the other. Now, the power of the voice is not an exclusive ability to the Dragonborn. The Greybeards are a testament to this. But it is worth discussing that Valak's Thu'um was able to not only stand his own ground against Miraak, but beat him so decisively that Hermaeus Mora was forced to shelter Miraak in Apocrypha to save him from death. This power of the Thu'um could have been gifted to Valak as a power from his dragon patron, or it is possible that simply through his own study, he was able to learn powerful shouts. This is when we get into Crazy Town, though. Is it also possible that his power came from within? Does Valak's victory against Miraak perhaps point to him being a Dragonborn himself? Now, I will be the first to admit, more than likely the answer is no, but it is an example of another Nord who has the ability to shout with power equal to or exceeding that of a known Dragonborn. One final note about Valak the Jailer is that when faced in the Elder Scrolls V, he actually knows no shouts. This can lead us in two directions. Direction 1, this is canon and proves that the original story was lying when it referred to Valak's shouting. Or Direction 2, Bethesda didn't add in the ability for him to shout because it would have forced them to make additions to the base Dragon Priest abilities, and this was considered too much work. Am I implying that Bethesda would cut such corners? Perhaps the world will never know. So we've of course discussed all types of topics at this point, from the necessities of historical evidence to the Akaviri Dragon Guard to even Miraak's own foundational story. What I would like to touch on next entails Miraak's downfall at the hands of the player character from the Elder Scrolls V's Last Dragonborn. Now, the Last Dragonborn is referred to with this title due to the prophecy of the Dragonborn. This prophecy is stated to hail from an Elder Scroll itself and be Akaviri in origin. It goes as follows. When misrule takes its place at the 8 corners of the world, when the brass tower walks and time is reshaped, when the thrice blessed fail and the red tower trembles, when the Dragonborn ruler loses his throne and the white tower falls, when the snow tower lies sundered, kingless, bleeding, the World Eater wakes, and the wheel turns upon the last Dragonborn. Quite a lot to digest all at once, but for avid fans of the Elder Scrolls series, some of the meanings of this prophecy may be clear. Each line seems to denote an event which is paramount to one of the plots of the mainline games. The World Eater wakes, and the wheel turns upon the last Dragonborn is our final line, which describes the events of the Elder Scrolls V Skyrim. The World Eater in this instance is of course Alduin, the wheel refers to the Orbis, which is also the universe, and the last Dragonborn then seems to be a direct reference to the player character from Skyrim. So why did I just bring all of that up? Well, I wanted to show where the information about the last Dragonborn's title comes from. It's from the prophecy of an Elder Scroll, which, I should remind you, Elder Scrolls are subject to change. They're not fixed until the events they foretell are carried out, which is just an interesting point to note. Also, the prophecy is littered with poetic-style descriptions of events. Things are not laid out clearly, is my point, despite our abilities to interpret the scroll. So, how do we know here in this instance that the last Dragonborn is also in reference to chronology? The short answer is that we don't. Now, it would be reasonable to assume that they're talking about a temporal usage of the word last, but how exactly can we know? Is it really accurate to say that the player character from Skyrim is the last being that Akatosh will ever grant the dragon blood to? Well, I don't know, which may sound like a cop-out, but I think sometimes admitting when you don't know is the most honest thing you can do. Personally, in a meta sense, I think it would be foolish for Bethesda Game Studios to cut off the possibility of ever even seeing a Dovahkiin again, but that's not really anything to do with actual in-game lore. Routing back to first and last, though. First and last to do what, exactly? This is really the linchpin here. If you've made it this far, please stick around for the rest. This dialogue comes from ESO's Necrom chapter, which allows you to venture into Apocrypha once more. In Apocrypha, there is a delve known as Choir's Wind, which holds this note.
My fellow ciphers, I am sorry. I have been a fool. I sabotaged Choir's Wind at the first servant's bidding. It started with small favors, retrieving books no one would miss in exchange for gold or receiving help with my own ambitions. But the first servant trapped me, drew me deeper into his plots until I could refuse nothing he demanded of me. I did not know the harm I was causing by helping that dragon-faced monster. But I should have. Sabinius.
This note is fascinating to me because it does something incredible. It gives us context for what first is actually in reference to. Finally, after nearly 12 years, we've been given clarity. I think this passage clearly notes that Miraak is not the first Dragonborn to ever have existed, but the first Dragonborn to ever serve under Hermaeus Mora. Cipher Sabinius is very clear to mention 2 times the phrase first servant rather than first or first Dragonborn. To me, this is very telling that someone on the ESO writer's staff was aware of the fact that Miraak's claim in Dragonborn is unsubstantiated, so they decided to throw an old crotchety lorebeard like me a bone. Miraak was roped into Hermaeus Mora's schemes early in his life, and throughout the Dragonborn DLC, he is attempting to be free from the Daedric Prince. Mora takes this opportunity to get his tentacles around the player character, and when Miraak dies, Mora states that he now has a new Dragonborn to serve him.
I have found a new Dragonborn to serve me.
This points to the last Dragonborn being the last Dragonborn to serve Mora, which I think is far more likely than them being the last Dragonborn ever. In conclusion, I think that the titles of First and Last have been grossly misunderstood in this community. We've gone over a ton of stuff in this video. We analyzed Miraak's claim from the historical lens, we examined the timeline, looked to other nations for Dragonborn evidence, reviewed Solstheim's foundational myth, scrutinized a prophecy, and finally reviewed one note that tied it all together. In my eyes, it is far more likely that Miraak is the first Dragonborn to serve under Hermaeus Mora, but not the first ever in history. Now, is it possible that he was the first to be blessed by Akatosh's blood? Sure, but I don't buy it. If you still do after watching this video, please comment below and tell me why. If there's anything that I missed, please also point that out to me, and of course, if you enjoyed the video, a like or subscription or share would mean quite a bit. Thanks for making it this far, and I hope to see you in the next one. Peace out.